The sound of poker chips hitting the table was nothing compared to the sound of a woman's life being gambled away. In a smoke-filled saloon in Dust Creek, 1874, Elena Brooks stood frozen as her husband's slurred voice cut through the noise. "I'll trade her for that corn." Laughter erupted. She wasn't a wife anymore. She was currency. Barren, broken, worthless in the eyes of men who measured value in bloodlines and profits. But from the shadows, a rancher with storm-gray eyes and calloused hands stepped forward. He didn't speak. He simply paid. And everything changed. If you want to see how a woman sold for grain became a force no man could break, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The winter of 1874 came to Dust Creek like a creditor collecting debts, cold, merciless, and indifferent to suffering. Snow piled against the crooked wooden buildings that lined the single main street, and the wind howled through gaps in poorly constructed walls. It was the kind of town where people came to disappear, where questions weren't asked and answers weren't given, where a man could lose everything and no one would remember his name by spring. Elena Brooks had learned not to hope for spring. She stood now in the back corner of Dutch Henry's saloon, her thin shawl pulled tight around shoulders that had learned to curve inward, to take up less space, to become invisible. The air was thick with tobacco smoke and the sour smell of cheap whiskey. Men crowded around tables, their voices rising and falling in the rhythms of drink and desperation. Cards slapped against wood, coins clinked. Someone laughed too loud at a joke that wasn't funny. Elena kept her eyes down, trained on a knot in the floorboard near her feet. She had learned this too, where to look, how to stand, when to breathe. Her husband, Marcus Hale, sat at the center table with 4 other men, his face flushed red with alcohol and rage. He'd been losing all night. She could tell by the set of his jaw, the way his hands trembled when he reached for his glass. "Another hand!" Marcus slurred, slamming his palm on the table. "Deal me in." "With what?" The man across from him, a cattle buyer named Jenks with a face like a dried apple, leaned back in his chair and grinned. "You're tapped out, Hale. Seen you lose your horse, your wagon, and what was left of your dignity about 2 hours ago." The other men laughed. Marcus's face darkened. "I got something to trade," he said. Elena felt the words before she understood them. A coldness that started in her stomach and spread outward, numbing her fingers, her lips, the space behind her eyes where tears should have been, but no longer came. "Oh yeah?" Jenks leaned forward, interested now. "What's that?" Marcus turned in his chair and his eyes, bloodshot and mean, found Elena in the corner. Her. The saloon didn't go quiet. That would have required respect, acknowledgement, some recognition that what was happening mattered. Instead, the noise simply shifted. The laughter took on a different quality, curious, cruel. "Your wife." Another man at the table, someone Elena didn't know, looked her up and down like he was assessing a horse. "She don't look like much." "She can cook," Marcus said. "Clean, mend, do all the things a woman's supposed to do." He paused, and his voice dropped into something uglier. "Except the one that matters. Barren as a salt flat. 5 years married, and not one child. What good is a woman who can't give you sons?" Elena's fingernails dug into her palms. She had heard these words before, hundreds of times, in hundreds of ways. Each time they were supposed to hurt less. They never did. "So you're trading a broken woman for a stake in a card game?" Jenks scratched his chin, considering. "That don't seem like much of a trade for us." "I'll throw her in for whatever you got," Marcus said. His desperation was showing now, the need that came with a losing streak and an empty bottle. "Food, coin, I don't care. Just deal me in." One of the other men, a farmer with a thick beard and suspicious eyes, reached into a sack beside his chair and pulled out a smaller burlap bag. He tossed it on the table. It landed with a soft, heavy sound. "Seed corn," he said. "About 20 pounds, best quality. Was going to plant it come spring, but..." He shrugged. "I'll trade it for a hand of cards. And if you lose, Hale, I get the woman." Elena's breath stopped. 20 pounds of corn. That was the price. That was what 5 years of cooking his meals and mending his clothes and enduring his anger and his disappointment and his hands had amounted to. A sack of seed corn that wouldn't even feed a family for a month. Done, Marcus said. He didn't look at her. The cards were dealt. Elena watched from the corner as the hand played out. She should run. She knew that. Should grab her shawl and push through the doors and disappear into the snow and the night. But where would she go? She had no money, no family, no prospects. Women didn't simply walk away in 1874. They walked from one man's ownership to another's, or they starved. The hand ended quickly. Marcus laid down his cards with shaking hands. The farmer grinned. "That's it then," Jenks said, and he actually laughed. "Marcus Hale just lost his wife to a sack of corn." "Fetch her over here," the farmer said, waving his hand like he was summoning a dog. "Let me see what I bought." Elena's legs wouldn't move. She stood locked in place, her mind screaming at her body to do something, anything, but the commands wouldn't translate into action. "You deaf woman?" The farmer's voice sharpened. "Get over here." Marcus stood, wobbling slightly, and started toward her. His hand reached out, and Elena flinched before she could stop herself. He grabbed her arm, not gently, and began pulling her toward the table. "She's stubborn," Marcus said. "You'll have to beat that out of her." They were halfway across the saloon floor when a voice cut through the noise. "Hold on." Everyone turned. A man had been sitting alone at a table near the door, so still and quiet that Elena hadn't noticed him until now. He stood slowly, unfolding to a height that made the other men look small. He was broad-shouldered and lean, dressed in a worn canvas coat and a hat that shadowed his face. When he stepped into the lamplight, Elena saw eyes the color of storm clouds, gray and steady and unreasonably calm. "Game's over," the farmer said. "Transaction's done." The stranger looked at Elena for a long moment, then at Marcus's hand gripping her arm. "What's the price?" he asked. His voice was quiet, but it carried. There was something in it that made men listen, not threat exactly, but the promise of consequence. "She's bought and paid for," the farmer said, but uncertainty crept into his voice. "I'll pay double," the stranger said. 40 pounds of corn, or the cash equivalent, right now." The farmer hesitated. Elena could see the calculation in his eyes, pride versus profit. Marcus had already released her arm and stepped back, the coward's retreat. "Why would you do that?" Jenks asked, suspicious. "You don't even know her." The stranger reached into his coat and pulled out a leather billfold. He counted out bills onto the farmer's table, more money than Elena had seen in months. "That cover it?" The farmer looked at the money, then at Elena, then back at the money. Pride lost. He scooped up the bills. "She's yours." The stranger pocketed his billfold and turned to Elena. Up close, she could see the weathering on his face, the sunlines around his eyes, the scar that cut through his left eyebrow. He was older than Marcus by perhaps 10 years, maybe 40 or 45, but he carried himself like a man who had earned every year. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "my name is Caleb North. I have a ranch about 8 miles west of here. I'm going to offer you something, and I need you to understand you have a choice." He paused, and his eyes, those strange, steady gray eyes, held hers without wavering. "You can come with me, or you can stay here. If you come, you'll have your own room, your own space. I won't touch you, won't make demands. You'll work if you want to work, rest if you need to rest. You'll be safe." Elena stared at him. The words didn't make sense. Men didn't make offers like that. Men took what they paid for. "And if I say no?" Her voice came out rough, unused. "Then I'll walk away," Caleb said simply, "and you'll figure out what comes next on your own terms." The saloon had gone quiet now. Everyone was watching. Elena looked at Marcus, who wouldn't meet her eyes, looked at the farmer counting his windfall, looked at Jenks and the other men whose faces showed nothing but curiosity about what entertainment might come next. Then she looked back at Caleb North, the stranger who had just paid 40 pounds of corn's worth to offer her a choice. It wasn't much of a choice, really. It was between unknown danger and certain degradation, between a gamble and a guarantee of suffering. She took the gamble. "I'll come," she said. Caleb nodded once. He removed his coat and held it out to her. It's cold outside. Elena took the coat, heavy canvas lined with wool, warm from his body heat. She pulled it around herself and realized it was the first time in years a man had given her something without expecting payment. They walked toward the door. Behind them, Marcus's voice rose, petulant and slurred. "You're making a mistake, Elena. You think he's better than me? He'll figure out you're broken soon enough." Elena didn't turn around. Caleb held the door open for her, and she stepped out into the winter night. The cold hit her like a fist, but the coat blocked most of it. Snow fell in steady sheets, and the wind carried ice. Caleb led her to where a large bay horse stood tied at the hitching post, patient and calm despite the weather. "His name is Samson," Caleb said, untying the reins. "He's gentle. I'm going to help you up, if that's all right." Elena nodded. She was still waiting for the trap to spring, for kindness to reveal its cost. Caleb laced his fingers together and boosted her into the saddle, then swung up behind her. He reached around her for the reins, careful not to let his arms press against her, maintaining a space between them even as they shared the horse. "It's about an hour's ride," he said. "You warm enough?" Yes. It was the truth. She was warmer than she'd been in months. They rode out of Dust Creek in silence, leaving behind the lights and the laughter and the smoke. The snow fell heavier, covering their tracks almost as soon as they made them. Elena watched the town disappear behind them and felt something she didn't recognize at first. It took almost a mile before she understood it was relief. "Why did you do that?" she asked finally, her voice barely carrying over the wind. Caleb was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful, measured. "I had a sister once, younger than me. When I was 19 and she was 16, our parents died. Cholera. I was working a ranch up north, trying to save enough to buy my own land. By the time I got home, she was gone. Not dead, sold. Our uncle sold her to a trapper for $30 and a winter's worth of furs. Said she was just a burden he couldn't afford to feed." Elena felt the story in her chest, heavy and familiar. "I looked for her," Caleb continued. "Spent 2 years tracking that trapper across 3 territories. Found him eventually, living in a shack up in the Montana hills. Found her grave behind it. She'd been dead 6 months. He said she fell. I didn't believe him, but there was nothing to do about it by then." "I'm sorry," Elena said. "I learned something from that," Caleb said. "Learned that women get treated like property because men let it happen. Because we participate in it, profit from it, or just stand by and watch. I decided I wouldn't be that kind of man anymore." He paused. "So when I heard that transaction happening tonight, I couldn't walk away. Wouldn't be able to live with myself if I did." They rode in silence for a while longer. Elena thought about choices and costs, about the difference between rescue and respect, about the fact that Caleb had given her a choice, had told her she could refuse even though he'd already paid. That mattered, more than she knew how to express. The ranch appeared gradually through the snow, first just darker shapes in the darkness, then resolving into a large barn, a stable, a main house, and 2 smaller structures. Caleb guided Samson toward the barn and dismounted, then helped Elena down. "Stable's warmer than the house right now," he said. "I'll get the fire going inside, but it'll take a few minutes. You can wait here with Samson while I get things ready, or come inside if you'd rather." "I'll wait," Elena said. She wasn't quite ready yet to enter a strange man's house, even one who had been kind so far. Caleb nodded like he understood. He showed her where he kept the horse brushes and feed, explained Samson's routine, then headed toward the house. Elena stood in the barn with the big bay horse, listening to him eat, feeling the warmth from his body, and trying to process what had just happened. She had been sold, bought, traded like corn or cattle or any other commodity, and yet somehow she felt less like property now than she had in the 5 years of her marriage. When Caleb returned to fetch her, smoke was rising from the house's chimney. "Fire's going," he said. "I've got the guest room ready for you. There's a lock on the inside of the door. I'll show you how it works. Tomorrow I can rig something more secure if you want it." He led her into the house, and Elena's first impression was of space and simplicity. The main room held a large fireplace, a solid table with 4 chairs, a counter and dry sink along one wall. Everything was clean but worn, functional rather than decorative. The kind of place built by someone who lived alone and didn't bother with comforts that required effort. "This way," Caleb said, and led her down a short hallway to a small room. It held a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, a chair, and a small window. Simple, but clean. The sheets on the bed looked freshly washed. Caleb pointed to the door. "This is the lock. It's a slide bolt. You push it closed from the inside and nothing can open the door from outside. Not even me. You control who comes in this room. Understood?" Elena nodded, her throat tight. "There's a pitcher and basin on the dresser for washing," Caleb continued. "I'll bring you some warmer clothes tomorrow. I've got some things from—" He hesitated. "From my sister. They've been packed away, but they're clean. Should fit you well enough until we can get you something proper." "Thank you," Elena managed. Caleb moved toward the door, then paused. "I know you don't have any reason to trust me, Mrs. Brooks. I know that everything you've experienced probably tells you that kindness has a price. But I want to be clear. I'm not expecting anything from you. Not labor, not anything else. You take whatever time you need to figure out what you want. If that's leaving, I'll help you get wherever you want to go. If it's staying, you'll stay on your own terms. That's the agreement." He left before she could respond, pulling the door closed behind him. Elena stood alone in the small room, staring at the slide bolt. Slowly, she reached out and pushed it closed. The sound it made, solid, final, secure, was the most beautiful thing she'd heard in years. She sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing Caleb's coat, and let herself cry for the first time since Marcus had stood up in that saloon and announced her worthlessness to a room full of strangers. She cried for the woman she'd been, for the life she'd lost, for the years spent trying to be enough for a man who would never see her as more than a failed vessel for his children. And when the tears finally stopped, she lay down on the clean sheets and slept more deeply than she had in 5 years. Morning came cold and clear. Elena woke to sunlight streaming through the small window and the smell of coffee. For a moment she didn't remember where she was. Then it all rushed back. The saloon, the corn, Caleb North. She got up and opened the slide bolt quietly, listening. From the main room came the sounds of someone moving around, the clank of metal on metal, wood being added to a fire. She used the basin to wash her face and hands, tried to smooth her dress, still wearing the same one from last night, and ventured out into the hallway. Caleb stood at the counter, cutting bread. He'd changed into a clean shirt, and his hair was damp like he'd washed. When he heard her, he turned and nodded. "Morning," he said. "Coffee's hot if you want some. Breakfast is nothing fancy. Bread and butter, some eggs if you're hungry." "Coffee would be good," Elena said. He poured her a cup from a blue enamel pot and set it on the table. Elena sat, wrapping her hands around the warm mug, and watched him work. His movements were efficient, practiced, a man used to caring for himself. "I've got some things to do this morning," Caleb said, setting a plate of bread and a small pot of butter on the table. "Need to check on the cattle, make sure they weathered the storm all right. Probably take me a few hours. You're welcome to stay inside where it's warm, or look around if you want. There's more coffee in the pot." "I could help," Elena heard herself say. Caleb looked at her, surprised. "You don't have to do that." "I know," Elena said. "But I'd like to, if that's all right." Something shifted in Caleb's expression. Not quite a smile, but close. "All right then. But we'll need to get you dressed warmer. That dress won't do anything against the cold." He disappeared into another room and returned with an armful of clothes. Heavy wool pants, a thick shirt, a lined vest, sturdy boots. "These were my sister's," he said quietly. Her name was Sarah. She would have wanted them to be useful. Elena took the clothes and changed in her room, marveling at the practicality of pants, at how much easier they made movement. When she emerged, Caleb handed her a coat, not as heavy as his, but warm, and a hat with ear flaps. "All right," he said, "let's go check on some cows." They spent the morning moving through the ranch, and Elena learned the rhythms of Caleb's world. He had about 50 head of cattle, some horses, chickens, and a coop near the barn. Everything was well maintained without being precious. Fences mended but weathered, buildings solid but plain. A working ranch, not a showpiece. Caleb talked as they worked, but not the way Marcus used to talk. Not filling silence because he needed to hear his own voice, but sharing information because it was useful. He explained which pastures he used for different seasons, how he managed the water supply, where he sold his cattle come fall. He asked her opinion on things, listened when she spoke, didn't dismiss her observations. It was the strangest morning Elena had experienced in years. By noon, they were both cold and tired. They returned to the house, and Caleb made a simple meal, soup from a pot he'd had simmering on the fire, more bread. They ate in comfortable silence. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said finally. "Of course." "What happens now? I mean," she struggled to find the words. "What am I supposed to do here?" Caleb set down his spoon and looked at her directly. "That's up to you. I told you last night, I'm not expecting anything from you. But if you're asking what life looks like here, I can tell you that. I run this ranch mostly alone. Sometimes I hire help for big jobs like branding or harvest, but day to day it's just me. I work from sunup to sundown most days. I cook simple food, keep the house clean enough, don't bother with much beyond that. If you want to help with ranch work, I'd welcome it. If you want to take over some household tasks, I won't stop you, but none of it is required. You're not here as my servant or my wife. You're just here, safe, until you decide what you want to be next." "That's not how the world works," Elena said quietly. "Women don't just exist. We have to be something. Wife, daughter, servant. We have to belong to someone." "Maybe that's how the world works," Caleb agreed. "But it's not how this ranch works. On this land, you belong to yourself." Elena felt tears threatening again and forced them back. "Why are you doing this?" "Because Sarah didn't get a choice," Caleb said simply. "And maybe I can't fix what happened to her, but I can make sure at least one woman gets to choose her own path." They finished their meal in silence. Afterward, Caleb showed Elena where he kept supplies, food in a cellar, tools in the barn, extra blankets in a chest. Gave her a complete accounting of what he had and where, like he was giving her a map of her new world. That night, Elena locked her door again and lay in bed thinking about choices. About the difference between being given to someone and choosing them. About how Caleb North had paid 40 pounds of corn's worth not to own her, but to free her. It was the strangest transaction she'd ever been part of. And somehow, impossibly, it felt like the only honest one. The first week passed like a held breath, careful, measured, waiting for something to break. Elena woke each morning to the sound of Caleb moving quietly through the house, building up the fire, setting coffee to boil. She would lie in her locked room, listening to these sounds, trying to decode them, searching for the moment when kindness would reveal its true cost. It never came. By the 8th day, she stopped locking the door at night, not because she trusted completely, but because her hands were tired of reaching for that bolt, and some part of her, small and cautious but growing, wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, Caleb North meant what he said. The rhythm of ranch life became familiar through repetition. Caleb rose before dawn and worked until the light failed, moving through his tasks with the steady efficiency of someone who had long ago accepted that survival required consistency. Elena found herself falling into step beside him, not because he asked, but because idleness felt more dangerous than labor. At least when her hands were busy, her mind couldn't spiral into the dark places where questions lived. They worked mostly in silence those first weeks. Comfortable silence, the kind that didn't need filling. Caleb would point out what needed doing, fences that wanted mending, water troughs that needed breaking free of ice, hay that needed spreading for the cattle. Elena would nod and work alongside him, learning the language of the ranch through action rather than words. One morning in late February, nearly 3 weeks after that night in the saloon, Elena was collecting eggs from the chicken coop when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Her body tensed automatically, old instincts flaring. She set down the basket and moved toward the house, but Caleb was already stepping out onto the porch, his rifle held casually but ready. A wagon came into view, driven by a woman with iron-gray hair and a face that looked carved from determination. Behind her sat 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, ranging in age from perhaps 6 to 12. The woman pulled the wagon to a stop and called out, "Caleb North, you planning to shoot me or offer me coffee?" The tension in Caleb's shoulders eased. He set the rifle against the porch rail and smiled, the first real smile Elena had seen from him. "Mrs. Brennan, wasn't expecting company." "Clearly," the woman said, climbing down from the wagon with surprising agility for someone who had to be past 60. Heard through the grapevine you had someone new staying with you. Thought I'd come verify that the rumors aren't as scandalous as Dust Creek is making them sound. Caleb's smile turned wry. When has Dust Creek ever gotten a story right? Never, Mrs. Brennan agreed. She turned her sharp eyes on Elena, who had emerged from behind the coop. You must be the woman everyone's talking about. I'm Margaret Brennan. I run the ranch about 6 miles east of here with my 3 sons and my late husband's stubbornness. These are my grandchildren, Thomas, William, and Mary. The children waved shyly from the wagon. Elena found herself raising a hand in return, uncertain how to navigate this sudden intrusion of other people into her carefully controlled world. Come inside, Caleb said. Coffee's hot, and I think there's still some of that bread Elena made yesterday. They all filed into the house, the children wide-eyed and curious, Mrs. Brennan assessing everything with the practiced eye of someone who missed nothing. Elena busied herself with the coffee pot, grateful for something to do with her hands. So, Mrs. Brennan said, settling herself at the table while the children explored the main room with the careful manners of those who'd been taught not to touch. I'm going to speak plainly because that's how I am. There's talk in town about you, girl. Some of it's ugly, most of it's speculation. I came out here to get the truth from the source and to let you know that not everyone in this territory is as useless as the men in that saloon. Elena set a cup of coffee in front of Mrs. Brennan and met her eyes. What kind of talk? The kind that says Caleb bought himself a wife and is probably working you to death or worse, Mrs. Brennan said bluntly. The kind that says you must be desperate or crazy to go with a stranger into the wilderness. The kind that says a woman who can't bear children isn't worth the corn she was traded for. The words landed like blows, but Elena kept her face still. She'd heard worse, thought worse about herself in the dark hours before dawn. And what do you think? Elena asked. Mrs. Brennan took a long sip of her coffee, studying Elena over the rim of her cup. I think Caleb North is one of the few decent men I've met in 40 years of living in this territory. I think his sister's death broke something in him that made him pay attention to things most men ignore. And I think you look like a woman who's been given breathing room for the first time in a long while. Elena felt something loosen in her chest. He's been kind. Kind is easy for a day or a week, Mrs. Brennan said. Let's see if he's still kind in 6 months, a year. But I'll tell you this, if he's not, you come to my place. I've got room and I've got work, and I don't tolerate any man who thinks women are property. She paused. That includes my own sons, who know better than to test me on it. Thank you, Elena said quietly. Mrs. Brennan nodded and turned her attention to Caleb. Now then, I actually came out here for a reason beyond nosiness. Spring branding is coming up in about 6 weeks. I'm going to need extra hands, and I'm willing to pay fair wages plus meals. You interested? Depends on the wages, Caleb said, but Elena could hear the agreement already in his voice. They negotiated terms while the children pestered Elena with questions about the chickens, and whether there were any cats in the barn, and if she knew how to make gingerbread. She found herself answering patiently, even smiling at their enthusiasm. It had been a long time since she'd been around children. Marcus had made sure to avoid families with young ones, didn't want the reminder of what Elena couldn't give him. When Mrs. Brennan finally loaded her grandchildren back into the wagon and prepared to leave, she gripped Elena's hand firmly. You remember what I said. You need anything, you come to me. We women have to look after each other out here because nobody else will. After they left, the house felt quieter than before. Elena cleaned up the coffee cups and put away the bread while Caleb stood at the window, watching the wagon disappear into the distance. She's a good woman, he said finally. Lost her husband 10 years ago to a bad fall. Could have sold the ranch and moved to town, but she stayed. Built it into one of the most productive operations in the territory, just her and her sons. She seems formidable, Elena said. That's a kind word for it, Caleb replied, and there was warmth in his voice. She once chased off a group of claim jumpers with nothing but a shotgun in her tongue. The shotgun was just for show. Her words did the real damage. Elena smiled despite herself. I believe it. That night at dinner, venison stew that Elena had made from a recipe her mother taught her years ago, Caleb asked her a question that caught her off guard. Did you want children? Before Marcus decided you were broken, was it something you hoped for? Elena's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. No one had ever asked her that before. Marcus had simply expected it, then resented her when it didn't happen. But wanted? Had she wanted children, or just wanted to be enough? I don't know, she said honestly. I thought I did because that's what you're supposed to want. What women are for, according to everyone. But now I wonder if I wanted children or if I just wanted Marcus to stop being angry at me. Caleb nodded slowly. My sister used to say something similar, said she couldn't tell anymore what she wanted versus what everyone told her she should want. Made me realize how much we men take for granted, that our wants get to be our own. Did she want to marry that trapper? Elena asked. Or did your uncle just decide for her? She wrote me a letter, Caleb said, his voice going quiet and distant. Got to me 2 months after she'd already left. She said she didn't want to go, but didn't see any choice. Said the trapper seemed mean, but at least he had food and shelter. Said she was sorry for being a burden. He stood and carried his bowl to the counter, his back to Elena. She was 16 years old and she apologized for existing, for needing food and space and care. That's what the world does to women, makes them apologize for having basic needs. Elena felt tears pricking her eyes but forced them back. What was her name? You said Sarah, but tell me about her. What was she like? Caleb turned, surprised by the question, then thoughtful. He sat back down at the table, and for the first time since Elena had met him, he talked freely. Told stories about Sarah as a child, how she used to follow him around the farm, asking endless questions, how she loved horses and could gentle even the most skittish colt, how she had a laugh that sounded like water over rocks, bright and clear, how she'd been teaching herself to read from an old primer their mother had kept, sounding out words by candlelight after their parents had gone to bed. She was smart, Caleb said. Smarter than me by half. Could have done something with her life if she'd been given the chance. Instead, she got sold to a man who worked her to death in a shack in the mountains, and nobody cared because she was just a girl. You cared, Elena said. Not soon enough, Caleb replied. Not when it mattered. They sat in silence after that, the weight of old grief settling between them like snow. But it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of shared understanding, of two people who knew what it meant to be shaped by loss. The weeks rolled forward into March, and the land began to show signs of waking. The snow receded gradually, revealing brown grass and muddy earth. The cattle grew restless in their winter pastures. The chickens laid more eggs, and Elena found herself settling into a life she hadn't known was possible. She took over the cooking without being asked, but because she enjoyed it, enjoyed having access to a properly stocked pantry, enjoyed the challenge of creating something good from simple ingredients. Caleb praised her food with genuine appreciation, never taking it for granted. She mended his clothes because she noticed they needed it, not because he demanded it. She organized the house slowly, finding places for things, creating systems that made daily life easier. And Caleb never once treated any of it as expectation or obligation. He thanked her for every meal, told her she didn't have to if she didn't want to, offered to do tasks himself if she was tired. It was so foreign to her experience of men that she kept waiting for the reality to assert itself, for him to slip and reveal what he really expected from her. One evening in mid-March, a storm rolled in fast and hard, the kind that made the house shudder and the windows rattle. They'd spent the afternoon securing everything outside, bringing the horses into the barn, making sure the cattle had access to shelter. By the time they got back to the house, they were both soaked and shivering. Elena changed into dry clothes in her room and emerged to find Caleb building up the fire, still in his wet shirt. You should change, she said. You'll catch cold. Will in a minute, he said. Want to get this fire going first. But 15 minutes later, he was still in the wet clothes, focused on preparing dinner. Elena watched him, saw the way he was starting to shiver, and felt something shift in her, not attraction exactly, but a kind of exasperated fondness that surprised her. Caleb North, she said firmly. Go change your clothes right now, or I'm going to assume you're trying to make yourself sick just to prove some kind of point about martyrdom. He looked at her, startled, then laughed, a real laugh that transformed his usually serious face. Yes, ma'am, he said, and disappeared into his room. When he returned in dry clothes, Elena had taken over the dinner preparation. She handed him a cup of hot coffee laced with honey. Drink this, and next time I tell you to take care of yourself, listen the first time. You sound like Sarah, Caleb said, but there was no sadness in it this time, just warmth. They ate dinner while the storm raged outside, and somehow the conversation turned to their childhoods, the things they remembered, the moments that shaped them. Elena found herself telling stories she hadn't thought about in years, about her mother teaching her to make bread, about sneaking out to watch meteor showers with her older brother, about the time she'd tried to rescue a baby bird and ended up with a barn full of cats trying to eat it. Caleb told her about learning to break horses from his father, about the first time he'd successfully delivered a calf, about the summer he and Sarah had built an elaborate fort in the hayloft that had promptly collapsed the first time it rained. They laughed together, and Elena realized it was the first time she'd laughed, really laughed, in years. The sound felt strange coming from her throat, rusty and unpracticed, but good. "Can I ask you something?" Caleb said when the laughter had faded into comfortable quiet. "Of course. What happened with Marcus? I mean, I know what happened at the end, but how did you end up married to him in the first place?" Elena wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, gathering her thoughts. "I was 18. My parents had died the year before. Consumption took them both within weeks of each other. My brother was working up north, sending money when he could, but it wasn't enough. Marcus came through town with a cattle drive. He was handsome, charming, full of plans and promises. He said he wanted to settle down, start a family, build something permanent. I thought," she paused, "I thought he would take care of me. Thought I'd found someone safe." "When did it change?" Caleb asked gently. "About 6 months after we married. I wasn't pregnant yet, and he started making comments. Little things at first, jokes about my cooking, observations about other women who already had babies. Then it got meaner. By the end of the first year, everything I did was wrong. I couldn't cook right, couldn't clean right, couldn't satisfy him, and definitely couldn't give him the sons he wanted." Elena's voice had gone flat, the way it did when she talked about things that hurt too much for emotion. "He started drinking more, started going into town and not coming back for days. When he was home, he was either angry or indifferent. I learned to make myself small, to stay out of his way, to not want anything or need anything, to just exist without taking up space." "That's not existing," Caleb said quietly. "That's just surviving." "Is there a difference?" "Yes," Caleb said firmly. "Existing means you get to want things, to have opinions and preferences and needs. Surviving is just making it through until tomorrow. You've been surviving for 5 years, Elena. You deserve the chance to exist." She looked at him across the table, this man who had bought her freedom with 40 pounds of corn's worth and never once asked for anything in return. "I don't know how anymore." "Then we'll figure it out," Caleb said. "One day at a time. No pressure, no expectations, just figuring it out." The storm passed in the night, and morning came clear and bright. Elena woke to the sound of someone singing, a rough, untrained voice carrying a tune she didn't recognize. She opened her door and found Caleb at the stove, making breakfast and singing quietly to himself. He turned when he heard her and had the grace to look embarrassed. "Sorry, didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't," Elena said. "I didn't know you could sing." "I can't, really, but Sarah used to say that singing while you work makes the work go faster, so I got in the habit." He flipped something in the pan. "Pancakes this morning, if that's all right. Figured we both earned something better than porridge after yesterday." They ate pancakes with butter and the last of some preserves Mrs. Brennan had brought by on her visit. Outside, the world sparkled with melting snow, everything bright and clean and new. "I need to ride out to the far pasture today," Caleb said. "Check on the herd, make sure none of them got into trouble during the storm. You're welcome to come along if you want, or stay here and rest, whatever suits you." Elena considered. The old Elena, the one who had learned to make herself small, would have stayed, would have found work to do in the house, would have kept herself busy and out of the way. But that Elena had been sold for a sack of corn. This Elena, the one who was slowly learning to exist rather than just survive, wanted to see the far pasture. "I'll come," she said. They saddled up 2 horses, Samson for Caleb and a smaller mare named Daisy for Elena. The ride took them across open country, through stands of pine that still held snow in their shadowed places, past a creek running high with snowmelt. Caleb pointed out landmarks, told her the history of different parts of the ranch, explained his plans for the coming season. The cattle were fine, gathered in a stand of cottonwoods and looking mildly annoyed at being checked on. Caleb counted them, looked them over for injuries, nodded with satisfaction. "All accounted for," he said. "That's a good sign. Sometimes after a storm like that, you lose one or two to stupidity or bad luck." On the way back, they stopped at a high point that overlooked most of the ranch. Caleb dismounted and stood looking out over the land, and Elena joined him. "This place used to belong to a family named Peterson," Caleb said. "They came out here 15 years ago with big dreams and not enough practical knowledge. Lost everything in a bad winter. I bought it from the bank for cheap and spent 5 years building it back up into something sustainable." He glanced at her. "It's not much compared to the big operations, but it's mine. Built it with my own hands and my own decisions. Nobody can take it away from me." "It's beautiful," Elena said, and meant it. "It could be better," Caleb said thoughtfully. "Could use more diversification. Maybe some crops, a bigger vegetable garden. Could use better water management. Could use—" He trailed off, then smiled slightly. "Could use a lot of things. But it's a start." They rode back in comfortable silence, arriving as the sun touched the western horizon. That night they played cards by lamplight, a game Caleb taught her that involved more strategy than luck. Elena found herself competitive in a way she hadn't been in years, found herself enjoying the simple pleasure of trying to win. "You're good at this," Caleb said when she won the third hand in a row. "Beginner's luck," Elena replied, but she was smiling. "I don't think so," Caleb said. "I think you've got a head for strategy. You've just never had the chance to use it." Spring arrived in earnest in April, and with it came the branding work at Mrs. Brennan's ranch. Caleb left before dawn and didn't return until after dark, exhausted and smelling of smoke and cattle. Elena found herself missing his presence during those long days, missing the quiet companionship they'd built. She kept herself busy with the chickens and the garden she'd started, but the house felt empty without him. On the third day, Mrs. Brennan herself appeared at the door shortly after breakfast. "Elena? Good, you're here. I need another set of hands at the branding, and I'm willing to pay. You interested?" Elena hesitated. "I don't know anything about branding cattle." "Neither did I until someone taught me," Mrs. Brennan said briskly. "Come on, I'll put you to work with Mary and the other women doing the cooking and supply management. It's hard work, but good wages, and you'll meet some of the other women in the territory." So Elena found herself at Mrs. Brennan's ranch, working alongside 6 other women of various ages who managed the enormous task of feeding 20 men working from dawn to dusk. It was chaos and camaraderie, hard work and harder laughter. The women traded stories and recipes and gossip, taught Elena the local politics of who liked whom and which families were feuding and which ranches were struggling. A woman named Ruth, younger than Elena by a few years, with a ready smile and calloused hands, attached herself to Elena as a sort of guide. "Don't mind Clara," she said, when one older woman made a sharp comment about Elena's biscuits being too dense. "She's been bitter since her husband ran off with a saloon girl 3 years ago. Takes it out on everyone's cooking." "The biscuits are too dense," Elena said honestly. "They are," Ruth agreed cheerfully, "but that's fixable. Here, let me show you the trick. Less water, more lard, and you fold it gentle-like. Don't mash it." They worked side by side, and Ruth talked easily about her life. Married to a farmer named John, 3 children under 8, constantly exhausted, but mostly happy. "John's a good man," she said. "Takes his share of the housework, doesn't hit, doesn't drink too much. I know that's a low bar, but out here you take what you can get." "Caleb's like that," Elena heard herself say. "Good, I mean." Ruth gave her a knowing look. "I heard about what happened, about the saloon and the corn and all that. Most women would have run the other direction." "I didn't have much choice," Elena said. "There's always a choice," Ruth replied. "Sometimes all the choices are bad, but there's still choosing. You chose Caleb North over whatever else was on offer. That took courage." Elena didn't feel courageous. She felt like someone still waiting for the trap to spring, for the cost to come due. But she didn't say that to Ruth. In the evening, when the branding work was done and the men were eating dinner, Elena found Caleb washing up at the pump. He looked exhausted, his shirt stained with sweat and dirt, his hands raw from rope and leather. "Hey," she said softly. He looked up and smiled, tired but genuine. "Hey yourself. Didn't expect to see you here." "Mrs. Brennan recruited me," Elena said. "Put me to work in the kitchen." "How's it going?" "My biscuits are too dense, apparently." Caleb laughed, and the sound was warm in the cooling evening air. "I like your biscuits." "You're biased," Elena said, but she was smiling. "Come on, let's get you fed before someone else eats your share." They sat together at the long tables Mrs. Brennan had set up in her yard, surrounded by 20 other people eating and talking and laughing. Elena felt Caleb's presence beside her like an anchor, solid and steady. At one point, his hand brushed hers, reaching for the breadbasket, and instead of flinching away, Elena found herself letting the contact linger for just a moment. It was such a small thing, but it felt enormous. The branding work took 2 weeks, and by the end, Elena knew the names of every woman in a 20-mile radius and had been invited to 3 different Sunday dinners. She'd learned to make biscuits that weren't dense and stew that could feed 20 and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. She'd listened to stories about surviving winters and losing children and building lives in an unforgiving land. She'd seen women who were tired and worn and still somehow beautiful in their resilience. On the last day, Mrs. Brennan paid her in cash, more money than Elena had ever held in her life. "You earned it," Mrs. Brennan said firmly when Elena tried to protest. "And I want you to know that if you ever need work, my door's open. You've got good hands and a steady head. That's worth more than most people realize." Caleb and Elena rode back to the ranch together in the late afternoon, both tired but satisfied. The land was green now, transformed by spring, and the air smelled like growing things. "Thank you," Elena said as they approached the house. "For what?" "For letting me come with you, for not keeping me locked away like some kind of secret." Caleb reined in Samson and turned to look at her. "Elena, you're not my secret. You're not my possession. You're a woman living on this ranch of her own choice. And anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me. But you don't belong in shadows. You never did." Elena felt something crack open in her chest. Not breaking, but opening, like ice giving way to spring water. "I'm starting to believe that," she said quietly. "Good," Caleb said, and then, even quieter, "That's real good." That night, for the first time since arriving at the ranch, Elena left her door open while she slept. Not locked, not barred, just open. It was a small gesture, but it felt like trust. And in the morning, when she woke and padded out to the kitchen, she found that Caleb had left coffee warming on the stove and a note beside it in his careful handwriting. "Gone to check the north fence. Back by noon. There's bread in the box and jam in the cellar. Take what you want. See. Take what you want." Elena read those words 3 times, letting them settle into her bones. Then she poured herself coffee, cut a thick slice of bread, and sat at the table in a house that was starting to feel like home, learning slowly what it meant to want things again. The wanting started small and grew like prairie grass after rain, quiet at first, then everywhere Elena looked. She wanted coffee in the morning without asking permission, wanted to plant tomatoes in the south corner where the sun hit longest, wanted to rearrange the pantry so the things she used most were within easy reach, wanted to sit on the porch in the evening and watch the sky change colors without wondering if someone would punish her for idleness. Caleb encouraged every want, treated each one like it mattered. When she mentioned the tomatoes, he spent a Sunday afternoon building her raised beds from scrap lumber. When she reorganized the pantry, he praised the efficiency and asked her opinion on where other things should go. When she sat on the porch, he sometimes joined her in comfortable silence, other times left her to her thoughts, reading her mood with an accuracy that still surprised her. By late May, Elena had lived at the ranch for 4 months. It felt like 4 years and 4 days all at once, long enough that her old life seemed distant and unreal, recent enough that she still sometimes woke in the night, expecting to find herself back in Marcus's house, the whole thing a dream that kindness had conjured. But it wasn't a dream. It was real, solid, built from quiet mornings and shared work and the slow accumulation of small freedoms that added up to something she was almost ready to call happiness. The threat arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in early June, riding a half-lame horse and carrying the stink of cheap whiskey and cheaper desperation. Elena was in the garden pulling weeds when she heard the hoofbeats. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun, and felt her stomach drop when she recognized the rider. Marcus Hale looked worse than when she'd last seen him. Thinner, meaner, with the hollowed-out eyes of a man who'd been losing for so long he'd forgotten what winning felt like. He reined in his struggling horse at the edge of the garden and stared down at her. "Well now," he said, his voice slurred even in the bright light of afternoon. "Don't you look comfortable? Playing house with your new man." Elena's hands tightened on the weeding fork she'd been using. "What do you want, Marcus?" "What do I want?" He laughed, bitter and sharp. "I want what's mine. I want my wife back." "I'm not your wife anymore," Elena said, keeping her voice steady even though her heart was hammering. "You sold me, remember? For a sack of corn." "That wasn't legal," Marcus said, swinging down from his horse with the unsteady grace of the perpetually drunk. "Man can't sell his wife. That was just a transaction between men. But you're still married to me, Elena, still bound by vows, whether some rancher paid for you or not." "Those vows ended the moment you decided I was worth less than seed corn," Elena said. She was backing toward the house now, slowly, trying not to show fear even though it was flooding through her veins like ice water. "Where is he?" Marcus looked toward the barn, the stable, squinting against the sun. "Where's the man who thinks he can take another man's property?" "I'm not property," Elena said, and her voice came out stronger than she felt. "Not yours, not his, not anyone's." "Is that what he told you?" Marcus took a step closer, and Elena could smell him now, sweat and alcohol and something rancid underneath. "That you're free? That you get to choose?" "Women don't choose, Elena. You should have learned that by now." The kitchen door opened and Caleb stepped out onto the porch. He must have heard the voices, the threat in them. He held no weapon, but his presence alone made Marcus stop advancing. "You need to leave," Caleb said quietly. "Right now." "That's my wife," Marcus said, pointing at Elena with a hand that shook. "You had no right to take her." "I didn't take her," Caleb replied, his voice still calm but with steel underneath. "You threw her away. I offered her a choice. She took it. That's the end of the story." "The hell it is." Marcus's hand dropped to his belt, and Elena saw with sickening clarity that he was wearing a gun, old and poorly maintained but still deadly. "I want her back, now. And I want compensation for the months you've been using what belongs to me." "She doesn't belong to you," Caleb said, and he was moving now, stepping down from the porch, positioning himself between Marcus and Elena. "She doesn't belong to anyone, and you need to leave before this gets ugly." "It's already ugly," Marcus said, and his hand closed around the grip of his gun. "Has been since the day I married a barren witch who couldn't even do the one thing women are good for." Elena felt the words like blows, old and familiar, designed to make her small. But something had changed in 4 months of being treated like she mattered. The words still hurt, but they didn't shrink her. "You're drunk," Caleb said, "and you're making threats you're going to regret. Take your horse and ride back to whatever hole you crawled out of. There's nothing for you here." "Nothing?" Marcus laughed again, that bitter sound that held no humor. "I got a wife here. I got property. You have nothing," Elena said, and her voice cut through his rambling like a blade. Both men turned to look at her. "You have nothing, Marcus, because you threw away everything that mattered. You had a wife who cooked your meals and cleaned your house and tried her best to make you happy. You had someone who wanted to love you, and you traded all of that for corn because I couldn't give you sons, because my body didn't work the way you wanted it to." She was moving forward now, past Caleb, past fear, past the old instinct to make herself small. "I spent 5 years apologizing for existing, 5 years trying to be enough for a man who would never see me as anything but a failure. And you know what I learned, Marcus? I learned that I was never the failure. You were." Marcus's face darkened with rage. "You don't talk to me like that. You're my wife." "No," Elena said firmly. "I'm not. Maybe legally on some piece of paper somewhere, but in every way that matters, I stopped being your wife the moment you sat down at that poker table and decided I was worth less than seed corn. You ended our marriage, Marcus. You, not me, not Caleb. You." You think he's better than me? Marcus's voice was rising now, getting louder and more dangerous. You think he wants you for anything other than what I wanted? He's using you, Elena. Soon as he figures out you're broken, he'll throw you away too. He already knows, Elena said quietly. I told him the first week I was here. And you know what he said? He said it didn't matter. Said I wasn't defined by what I couldn't do. Said I got to decide who I was and what I wanted. She paused. That's the difference between you and him, Marcus. He sees me as a person. You only ever saw me as a tool that didn't work right. Marcus's hand tightened on his gun, and Elena saw the decision forming in his alcohol-soaked brain before he fully made it. She saw his fingers start to move toward the trigger, saw the angle of the barrel rising, saw Caleb tense to move, and she stepped forward directly into Marcus's line of fire. Elena, no! Caleb's voice was sharp with alarm, but Elena didn't move. She stood between her past and her future, between the man who had broken her and the man who had helped her rebuild. And she looked Marcus Hale straight in his bloodshot eyes. If you're going to shoot someone, she said clearly, shoot me, because I'm the one who chose to leave. I'm the one who decided I'd rather take my chances with a stranger than spend one more day being treated like I was worthless. I chose this, Marcus. I chose him over you. I chose a future where I get to exist as something more than your disappointment. Get out of the way, Marcus said, but his hand was shaking worse now. No, Elena said. You want me back? Then you're going to have to drag me. You want to punish Caleb for giving me a choice? Then you're going to have to go through me first, because I'm not going to stand aside and let you destroy the first good thing that's happened to me in years. For a moment, everything hung suspended. The sun beat down hot on their heads. A meadowlark called from somewhere in the distance. Marcus's horse shifted and snorted, and three people stood locked in a moment where anything could happen. Then Marcus pulled the trigger. The shot went wild, whether because his hand was shaking or because at the last second even he couldn't shoot the woman he'd once promised to love. Elena would never know. The bullet whined past, missing her by feet, and before Marcus could aim again, Caleb was on him. They went down hard, rolling in the dirt, grappling for the gun. Elena heard herself screaming, not words, just sound, and then suddenly there were more people there. Mrs. Brennan and her oldest son Thomas appeared from around the barn, where they'd apparently been visiting. Thomas pulled Caleb off Marcus while Mrs. Brennan kicked the gun away from Marcus's reaching hand. Enough! Mrs. Brennan's voice cracked like a whip. Everybody stop moving, right now! They froze. Marcus lay in the dirt gasping, blood running from his nose where Caleb had hit him. Caleb stood with Thomas's hands on his shoulders, breathing hard, his eyes wild. Elena realized she was shaking, her whole body trembling with adrenaline and shock. Mrs. Brennan picked up Marcus's gun with the casual competence of someone who'd handled firearms her whole life. She checked the chamber, removed the remaining bullets, and tucked both into her apron pocket. Then she looked down at Marcus with an expression of pure disgust. Marcus Hale, she said, you're dumber than a box of rocks and twice as useless. You just tried to shoot a woman in front of witnesses. That's attempted murder, in case your pickled brain can't work that out. She's my wife, Marcus wheezed. I got a right. You have no rights here, Mrs. Brennan said flatly. Thomas, go fetch the sheriff. Tell him we've got a man who needs arresting for attempted murder and making threats with a deadly weapon. Go on, boy. Thomas took off at a run toward the barn where his horse was tied. Mrs. Brennan turned her attention to Elena. You all right, child? Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. Mrs. Brennan pulled her into a brief, fierce hug. That was either the bravest or the stupidest thing I've ever seen a woman do. Maybe both. But you stood your ground, and that counts for something. Caleb was at Elena's side now, his hands hovering near her shoulders like he wanted to touch her, but wasn't sure if he should. You could have been killed, he said, and his voice was raw. Elena, you can't. You shouldn't have. I had to, Elena said simply. He was going to shoot you. Better me than you, Caleb said fiercely. No, Elena said, and she was surprised by how certain she sounded. Not better you. I chose this life, Caleb. I chose you. I wasn't going to stand by and watch him destroy it without fighting back. They stared at each other for a long moment, something shifting between them, something that had been building for months finally crystallizing into clarity. But before either could speak, Mrs. Brennan cleared her throat. "We've got a situation to handle first," she said practically. "Romance can wait until after we've dealt with this piece of human garbage." Marcus tried to sit up, but Mrs. Brennan put her boot on his chest. Not hard enough to hurt, but firmly enough to keep him down. "You stay right there. Sheriff's coming, and you're going to answer for what you did here today." "I didn't do anything," Marcus protested. "I just wanted my wife back." "You drew a weapon and fired at an unarmed woman," Mrs. Brennan said. "That's not nothing, you fool. That's years in prison if the judge is feeling merciful. Hanging if he's not." The color drained from Marcus's face as the reality of his situation finally penetrated the alcohol. "It was an accident. The gun went off." "The gun went off because you pulled the trigger," Caleb said coldly. "I was watching. We all were watching. You aimed at Elena and you fired. That's not an accident. That's attempted murder." Marcus started crying then, messy and pathetic, pleading with Elena to tell them it wasn't true, to say it was a mistake, to forgive him one more time. Elena looked down at the man she'd once promised to love and honor, reduced now to tears and snot and desperate bargaining, and felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, not even satisfaction, just a kind of distant certainty that this part of her life was over. "I won't lie for you," she said quietly. "Not anymore. Not ever again." The sheriff arrived an hour later with Thomas, a broad man named Garrett who'd seen enough frontier justice to be unimpressed by most things, but who still raised his eyebrows when he heard the story. He listened to all three witnesses, Elena, Caleb, and Mrs. Brennan, took careful notes, then hauled Marcus to his feet and put him in chains. "You'll need to come to town tomorrow and give official statements," Sheriff Garrett said. "All three of you. This is going to trial, and the judge is going to want to hear directly from everyone who saw what happened." "What about her marriage?" Mrs. Brennan asked, gesturing to Elena. "She's still legally tied to this fool, isn't she?" Sheriff Garrett scratched his jaw. "That's a civil matter, not criminal. She'd need to file for divorce. Usually requires cause, abandonment, cruelty, adultery, that kind of thing." "He sold her for a sack of corn," Caleb said. "That count as abandonment?" "It counts as something," the sheriff said. "I'll talk to Judge Morrison, see what he says. Man who sells his wife in a poker game probably shouldn't get to keep claiming her as property." He looked at Elena. "You want a divorce, ma'am?" "Yes," Elena said without hesitation. "I want to be legally free of him." "I'll see what I can do," the sheriff said. He started leading Marcus toward his horse, then paused and looked back at Caleb. "For what it's worth, North, you did the right thing back in that saloon. Not many men would have stepped up like that. This territory needs more men like you and fewer like him." After they left, Elena, Caleb, and Mrs. Brennan stood in the yard while the sun started its descent toward the horizon. Elena felt wrung out, exhausted in a way that went deeper than physical tiredness. She'd faced down her past and survived, had stood in front of a loaded gun and declared her choice, had finally, fully, closed the door on the woman she'd been. "I should get back," Mrs. Brennan said. "Thomas is waiting with the wagon, but Elena—" She gripped Elena's hands firmly. "You did good today, real good. Takes strength to stand up to a man with a gun. Takes even more strength to stand up to a man who once had power over you. You've got steel in your spine, girl. Don't ever forget that." After Mrs. Brennan left, Elena and Caleb stood alone in the gathering dusk. The adrenaline was fading now, leaving behind the shakes and the reality of what had almost happened. "Come inside," Caleb said gently. "Let me make you some tea. Something to calm your nerves." Elena followed him into the house, sank into a chair at the kitchen table, and watched as he moved through the familiar motions of heating water, measuring out dried herbs from the collection Mrs. Brennan had helped Elena start. His hands were steady, but she could see tension in his shoulders, in the set of his jaw. He set a cup in front of her and sat down across the table. For a long moment, neither spoke. "I thought he was going to kill you," Caleb said finally, and his voice was rough. "When you stepped in front of that gun, I thought—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Just kept seeing you falling, bleeding, gone, and knowing it would be my fault for bringing you here, for putting you in danger." "Stop," Elena said firmly. None of this was your fault. You gave me a choice when no one else would. You treated me like a person when everyone else treated me like property. If anyone's at fault here, it's Marcus for being a drunk, violent fool, but not you. Never you. Caleb's eyes met hers, and Elena saw fear there still. Fear in something else, something deeper that she wasn't quite ready to name. "Why did you do it?" he asked. "Why did you step in front of him?" Elena wrapped her hands around her cup of tea, gathering her thoughts. "Because for the first time in my life, I had something worth protecting. Not just my own life, but the life I've built here, the person I'm becoming, the future I can see now that I couldn't see before." She paused. "And because you matter to me, Caleb. You matter more than I knew how to say, and I wasn't going to let him hurt you." "I'm not worth dying for," Caleb said quietly. "Yes, you are," Elena said. "You're worth that and more. You gave me back my life. Let me protect it, and you, if I need to." They sat in silence after that, drinking tea while the light faded outside. Elena's hands finally stopped shaking. The world slowly righted itself into something manageable again. "I meant what I said out there," Elena said eventually, "about choosing you, about choosing this life. I want you to know that wasn't just heat of the moment or fear talking. I meant it." Caleb reached across the table slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. When she didn't, his hand covered hers. The contact was warm, solid, real. "I'm glad you're here," he said simply. "I'm glad you chose this. Chose me. And I want you to know, whatever happens with the trial, with the divorce, with any of it, you have a place here for as long as you want it. No conditions, no expectations. Just a place." "I want it," Elena said. "I want to stay." Something eased in Caleb's expression, a tension she hadn't realized he'd been carrying. "Good," he said. "That's real good." The next day they rode into Dust Creek together for the official statements. The town looked different in daylight without desperation, smaller, shabbier, less threatening. They met Sheriff Garrett at his office, a sturdy building that also served as the jail. Through a barred window, Elena could see Marcus sitting on a cot in his cell, head in his hands. He looked up when they entered, and their eyes met. Elena felt nothing. Whatever power he'd once held over her had burned away in the moment she'd stepped between him and Caleb. He was just a man now, a sad, broken man who'd thrown away everything good in his life because he couldn't see value in anything that didn't serve his ego. "Mrs. Hale," he said, standing and gripping the bars. "Please, you have to tell them it was an accident, that I didn't mean—" "My name," Elena interrupted clearly, "is Elena Brooks, not Hale. I gave up your name the same day you gave up any claim to me. And I won't lie for you, Marcus. Not about this. Not about anything. You tried to shoot me. Everyone saw it. And now you're going to face the consequences of that choice." She turned her backs on him and followed the sheriff into his office, where she gave her statement with calm precision. Described the confrontation, the threats, the gun, the shot. Described how Marcus had aimed and fired deliberately, how only his shaking hand or perhaps some last remaining conscience had kept the bullet from finding its mark. Caleb gave his statement next, his voice flat and factual. Then they waited while the sheriff wrote everything down in careful script, reading it back to them to confirm accuracy. "Judge Morrison wants to see you both tomorrow," Sheriff Garrett said. "He's prepared to hear your case for divorce on grounds of abandonment and attempted violence. Unusual to move this fast, but the judge says a man who tries to murder his wife has forfeited any right to remain married to her." He looked at Elena. "You'll need to swear to the facts under oath, and you'll need to state clearly that you want the marriage dissolved." "I do," Elena said firmly. "I want to be legally free of him." "Then be here tomorrow at 10 o'clock sharp," the sheriff said. "Judge Morrison doesn't tolerate lateness." They left the jail and walked through town toward the general store, where Elena needed to pick up supplies. People stared, some sympathetic, some merely curious, some openly judgmental. Elena kept her head high and ignored them all. In the store, the owner, a thin woman named Mrs. Kelsey, who'd always been kind despite Marcus's reputation, came around the counter and gripped Elena's hands. "I heard what happened," she said quietly. I'm glad you're alive, dear, and I'm glad you're finally free of that man. He was poison, and everyone knew it. Thank you, Elena said, surprised by the support. We women have to stick together out here, Mrs. Kelsey said. Not enough of us to waste energy judging each other for surviving however we can. You need anything, and I mean anything, you come see me. Understand? Elena felt tears threatening and forced them back. I understand. They gathered supplies and loaded them into Caleb's wagon, then started the ride back to the ranch. Halfway there, Caleb spoke. Are you scared? About tomorrow, I mean. Facing the judge. Elena considered. No, she said finally. I'm not scared. I'm ready. I've been ready to be free of Marcus for years. I just didn't know how to make it happen. Now I do. What happens after? Caleb asked. After the divorce is final. After all this is settled. What do you want then? It was the same question he'd been asking in different ways since the night he brought her home. What do you want, Elena? What do you need? What do you choose? He'd been teaching her all along that wanting was allowed, that her desires mattered. I want to stay, Elena said. I want to keep working the ranch with you, keep building the garden, learning from Mrs. Brennan, making this place better. She paused, gathering courage. I want to keep being around you, learning from you, building something with you. Caleb's hands tightened on the reins. Building what? Exactly. Elena took a breath. This was the edge of something, the precipice of change. She could step back to safety or step forward into unknown territory. 4 months ago, she would have chosen safety without thinking, but 4 months had taught her that safety without choice was just another kind of prison. A partnership, she said, not employer and employee, not rescuer and rescued, but partners. Two people choosing to build a life together because they want to, not because they have to. And after that, Caleb asked, his voice careful, if you want more than partnership someday, if you want... He stopped, started again. I'm not good with words, Elena, but I need you to know that somewhere along the way, between the saloon and today, between teaching you about cattle and watching you stand in front of a gun for me, I started hoping. Started wanting things I thought I'd given up on after Sarah died. Elena's heart was hammering again, but this time not from fear. What kind of things? The kind where this isn't just my ranch anymore, Caleb said. The kind where your name belongs on that gate, same as mine. The kind where we're building something together, not because we're convenient for each other, but because we choose each other, every day, on purpose. I want that too, Elena said quietly. But I need time. Need to be legally free first. Need to understand who I am when I'm not defined by being Marcus's wife. Can you wait for that? I've got all the time in the world, Caleb said, and I'll wait as long as you need. No pressure, no expectations, just hope, if that's all right. That's more than all right, Elena said, and she smiled, a real smile, full and genuine. That's everything. They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, both lost in thoughts about tomorrow and the days after, about endings and beginnings, and the space between where transformation happened. That night, Elena didn't lock her door. And when she finally fell asleep, she dreamed not of gunshots and threats, but of gardens growing and gates with 2 names carved side by side, and a future she was finally brave enough to reach for. Morning came too early and too bright. Elena woke with her stomach tight and her mind racing through everything that would happen today. The judge, the testimony, the final severing of legal ties to a man who had stopped being her husband long before he sold her for corn. She dressed carefully in the best dress she owned, one Mrs. Brennan had given her from her own daughter's old things, and braided her hair with hands that only shook a little. Caleb was already in the kitchen when she emerged, coffee brewed and eggs frying. He looked up when he heard her footsteps, and something in his expression gentled. "You look ready," he said. "I don't feel ready," Elena admitted. "I feel like I'm about to walk into battle." "You are," Caleb said simply, "but you've already won the important part. What happens today is just making the law catch up to the truth." He slid a plate across the table to her. "Eat. You'll need your strength." Elena forced down breakfast, even though her stomach protested. They cleaned up in silence, the familiar rhythm of shared tasks grounding her. When it was time to leave, Caleb held out her coat, His coat, really, the one he'd given her that first night, which she'd worn so often it had become hers through use, if not ownership. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready?" Elena said, and meant it. The ride to Dust Creek took an hour, and they spent it mostly quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. But halfway there, Caleb spoke. "Whatever the judge asks you today, whatever Marcus or his lawyer says, remember you're not that woman anymore, the one who apologized for existing. You're Elena Brooks, and you stood in front of a gun and declared your choice. That woman doesn't owe anyone explanations or justifications. She just tells the truth." Elena reached over and squeezed his hand briefly. "Thank you." "For what?" "For reminding me who I am now." Judge Morrison's courtroom was a modest affair, a large room above the general store that served multiple purposes depending on the day. Today it was arranged with a desk for the judge, a few benches for spectators, and chairs for the principals involved. Elena was surprised to see the benches nearly full. Mrs. Brennan sat in the front with Ruth beside her, and several other women Elena recognized from the branding work, Mrs. Kelsey from the general store. Even some men, ranchers who knew Caleb, townspeople who'd apparently heard about the shooting and come to see justice done. Marcus sat at a table with a lawyer Elena didn't recognize, a sharp-faced man in a dusty suit who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Marcus himself looked diminished, cleaned up for court, but hollow-eyed, the bravado of yesterday replaced with something that might have been fear, or might have been the beginning of understanding that he'd destroyed his own life. Sheriff Garrett stood near the door, arms crossed, watching everyone with the neutral expression of someone who'd seen enough human foolishness to be unsurprised by anything. Judge Morrison entered from a side door, a man in his 60s with white hair and sharp eyes that seemed to catalog everything they touched. Everyone stood until he settled himself behind his desk and gestured for them to sit. "We're here today," the judge began without preamble, "to address two matters. First, the criminal complaint against Marcus Hale for attempted murder. Second, the petition for divorce filed by Elena Brooks, née Hale, on grounds of abandonment and violence. We'll take the criminal matter first." He looked at Marcus. "Mr. Hale, you're charged with attempted murder and assault with a deadly weapon. How do you plead?" Marcus's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty by reason of temporary insanity brought on by extreme emotional distress." "Sit down," Judge Morrison said flatly. "I've read the witness statements. 3 people saw your client draw a weapon, aim it at his wife, and fire. Unless you're prepared to argue that all 3 witnesses are lying, including Mrs. Margaret Brennan, whose word I'd take over a saint's, then your client's best option is to plead guilty and hope for mercy." The lawyer sat down. Marcus remained standing, swaying slightly. "Your Honor, I just wanted my wife back. I wasn't trying to kill her, I swear." "You aimed a loaded gun at a woman and pulled the trigger," Judge Morrison interrupted. "Whether you meant to kill her or just scare her doesn't matter much to the law. You committed assault with a deadly weapon at minimum. Mrs. Brooks, please stand and tell me what happened yesterday afternoon." Elena stood, her legs steadier than she expected. She told the story clearly, without embellishment. Marcus's arrival, his demands, his threats, the gun, the shot. Described how he'd aimed deliberately, how she'd stepped into his line of fire, how the bullet had passed close enough that she'd heard it. "And why did you step in front of the gun, Mrs. Brooks?" Judge Morrison asked. "Because he was aiming at Mr. North," Elena said. "And Mr. North had done nothing wrong. He'd given me shelter and safety and choice when I had none. I wasn't going to let Marcus hurt him for that." "So you were willing to die for Mr. North?" Elena considered the question. "I was willing to protect what I'd built, my life, my future, my choice. If that meant risking death, then yes, I was willing." Judge Morrison nodded slowly. "Mr. North, your testimony matches Mrs. Brooks's account exactly. Mrs. Brennan, yours as well. Mr. Hale, do you dispute any of the facts as presented?" Marcus's lawyer stood again. "Your Honor, my client's memory of events is clouded by his emotional state. I asked Mr. Hale, not you," Judge Morrison said. "Mr. Hale, did you or did you not draw your weapon and fire at Mrs. Brooks?" Marcus looked at Elena, and she saw something break behind his eyes, the last resistance crumbling into acceptance. I did, he said quietly. I was angry. I was drunk. I wanted her back and she wouldn't come, and I lost control. I didn't mean to actually hit her. I just wanted to scare her into listening. That's enough, Judge Morrison said. Mr. Hale, you're hereby found guilty of assault with a deadly weapon and reckless endangerment. Sentencing will be in 3 days, after I've had time to review precedents and consider appropriate punishment. Sheriff Garrett, please return Mr. Hale to his cell. Marcus started to protest, but his lawyer grabbed his arm and hissed something Elena couldn't hear. They watched as the sheriff led Marcus out, his chains rattling against the wooden floor. After the door closed, Judge Morrison shuffled some papers on his desk and looked up at Elena. Now then, the matter of your marriage. Mrs. Brooks, you're petitioning for divorce on what grounds? Abandonment and cruelty, Your Honor, Elena said. My husband sold me in a poker game for a sack of corn 4 months ago. Before that, he subjected me to 5 years of verbal and emotional abuse because I couldn't bear children. He told me repeatedly that I was worthless, broken, a failure as a woman. He drank heavily and spent our money on gambling while I struggled to keep us fed. And yesterday he tried to shoot me when I refused to return to him. And you're certain you want this marriage dissolved? Judge Morrison asked. Divorce is not easily undone, Mrs. Brooks. It carries social consequences, particularly for women. I'm certain, Elena said firmly. I would rather face whatever social consequences come than spend one more day legally bound to a man who treats women as property. Judge Morrison turned to Marcus's lawyer. Does your client contest the divorce? The lawyer looked pained. Your Honor, my client, that is, Mr. Hale, wishes to preserve his marriage if possible. Mr. Hale tried to murder his wife yesterday, Judge Morrison said dryly. That doesn't suggest a strong desire to preserve marital harmony. Does he contest the specific grounds, the abandonment, the cruelty, the abuse? The lawyer shuffled through his papers. He maintains that the poker game was not legally binding, and therefore doesn't constitute abandonment. The poker game, Judge Morrison interrupted, in which he traded his wife for agricultural products, demonstrates beyond any doubt that he viewed her as property rather than as a partner. Whether it was legally binding is irrelevant. He abandoned his marital duties and obligations the moment he attempted to barter her like livestock. The judge looked at Marcus's lawyer with something approaching contempt. Unless you have actual legal grounds for contesting this divorce, sit down and let me do my job. The lawyer sat down. Judge Morrison pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began writing. The scratch of his pen was loud in the quiet room. Elena stood perfectly still, barely breathing, while her future was written in ink and legal terminology. Finally, the judge looked up. Elena Brooks, I hereby grant your petition for divorce from Marcus Hale on grounds of abandonment, cruelty, and violent assault. Your marriage is dissolved effective immediately. You are free to resume your maiden name, which I note you've already done. You have no financial obligations to Mr. Hale, nor he to you. All property shall remain with the party currently in possession, which means, Mrs. Brooks, that anything you brought into the marriage or acquired during it belongs solely to you. Elena felt something unlock in her chest. A door she'd been holding closed with all her strength suddenly swinging open, flooding her with light and air. Thank you, Your Honor. One more thing, Judge Morrison said, and his sharp eyes moved between Elena and Caleb. I'm going to speak plainly here, because I've been a judge for 30 years, and I've seen every kind of human arrangement there is. Mrs. Brooks, you're now living on Mr. North's ranch in what some might consider a compromising situation. While I personally don't care how two adults choose to arrange their lives, others in this territory will talk. They'll make assumptions. They'll judge you by standards they don't apply to men. Elena lifted her chin. Let them talk, Your Honor. A smile ghosted across Judge Morrison's face. That's the spirit. But I want you to understand your legal position. As an unmarried woman, you have fewer protections under the law than you did as a wife. Ironic, I know, given what kind of husband you had. You can't own property in your own name in this territory. You can't enter into contracts without a male guardian. You can't vote, obviously, and your testimony in court carries less weight than a man's in many jurisdictions. That seems unjust, Your Honor, Elena said quietly. It is unjust, Judge Morrison agreed, but it's the law, and I'm bound to inform you of it. That said, He picked up another document from his desk. Mr. North has filed a petition this morning requesting to serve as your legal guardian until such time as you choose to remarry or until the law changes to give women full legal standing. This would allow you to remain on his property without legal complications and would give you some protections if anyone tried to challenge your living situation. Do you consent to this arrangement? Elena turned to Caleb, surprised. He looked back at her steadily. It's just paperwork, he said quietly. But it would make things easier, make you safer, legally speaking. You'd still make your own decisions, control your own life. This just gives you the legal cover to do it. And if I wanted to leave, Elena asked, could I? Anytime, Caleb said. This doesn't bind you to me or the ranch. It just protects you from other people who might try to bind you against your will. Elena looked back at Judge Morrison. I consent, Your Honor. Then it's done, the judge said, signing the document with a flourish. Mr. North is now your legal guardian, with all the responsibilities and none of the actual authority that entails, since I suspect Mrs. Brooks would feed you your own teeth if you tried to exercise any real control over her life. A ripple of laughter went through the spectators, and Elena felt her face heat. But there was no malice in the judge's words, just a kind of pragmatic recognition of reality. Thank you, Your Honor, Elena said. Don't thank me, Judge Morrison replied. Thank Mr. North for being smart enough to figure out how to work around bad laws in order to protect you. And thank yourself for being brave enough to walk away from a man who didn't deserve you. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down with a sharp crack, and it was over. 5 years of marriage dissolved in less than an hour of testimony and paperwork. Elena stood in the sudden noise of people standing and talking, feeling untethered and weightless, like she might float away if something didn't anchor her. Caleb's hand found hers, warm and solid. You all right? I'm free, Elena said, and her voice cracked on the word. I'm actually free. Yes, you are, Caleb said, and his smile was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. Mrs. Brennan pushed through the small crowd to wrap Elena in a fierce hug. That's how it's done, she said proudly. That's how a woman takes control of her own life. I'm so proud of you, child. Ruth was there too, and Mrs. Kelsey and several other women Elena barely knew, all offering congratulations and support. The men hung back, some uncomfortable with the display of female solidarity, others nodding approval at Caleb. They finally extracted themselves from the well-wishers and made their way outside into the bright afternoon. Elena stood on the wooden sidewalk, breathing in air that somehow tasted different, cleaner, lighter, full of possibility. What happens now? She asked Caleb. Now we go home, Caleb said, unless there's something you need to do in town first. Home. He'd said it so naturally, like it was understood that his ranch was her home too. And the thing was, it did feel like home, more than any place had felt in years. There is one thing, Elena said. She walked across the street to the land office, a small building she'd never had reason to enter before. Caleb followed, curious. Inside, a clerk looked up from his ledger. Help you? I need to know who owns the property deed to the ranch 8 miles west of here, Elena said. The North Ranch. The clerk consulted his records. That'd be Caleb North. Bought it outright from the bank 7 years ago. No mortgage, no liens. Why? Just checking, Elena said. She turned to Caleb. It's really yours? Completely? Completely, Caleb confirmed. Why? Because I wanted to make sure that when my name gets added to that gate, it's on property that's actually yours to share, not borrowed, not mortgaged, not at risk of being taken away. Caleb stared at her. You want your name on the gate? You offered it, Elena said. Yesterday, on the wagon. You said my name belonged there same as yours. I want that. I want everyone who comes to that ranch to know that I belong there by choice, not by accident or charity or anything else. That it's my place too. But something shifted in Caleb's expression, hope and wonder and something tender that made Elena's breath catch. Then we'll carve it together, he said. When we get home, your name next to mine, both of us equal. They rode back to the ranch in the afternoon light, and Elena watched the landscape roll past with new eyes. This was her territory now, her land, her home, her choice. Not given to her by a man, but claimed by her own decision, protected by her own courage. When they arrived, Caleb pulled the wagon up to the barn and helped Elena down. They stood together looking at the gate, a simple wooden arch over the entrance to the property with North Ranch carved into it in sturdy letters. "We'll need to make it bigger," Caleb said thoughtfully. "Add a second line underneath, Brooks and North Ranch, or North and Brooks, doesn't matter which way around." "Brooks and North," Elena said, "alphabetically. Seems fair." Caleb went to get his woodworking tools, while Elena changed out of her court dress into her practical work clothes, the pants and shirt that had belonged to Sarah, which Elena now thought of as simply hers. When she came back outside, Caleb had a measuring stick and was sketching plans on a piece of paper. "Come look," he said. "Tell me what you think." Elena studied his sketch. The new line would fit perfectly underneath the original, the letters sized to match. Brooks and North Ranch, in the same sturdy script. "It's perfect," she said. They worked together through the afternoon, Caleb doing the actual carving while Elena held the gate steady and offered opinions on spacing and depth. The physical labor felt good, felt purposeful. Every letter carved was a declaration, a claiming, a permanent mark that said Elena Brooks existed here and mattered here and chose here. The sun was setting by the time they finished. They stood back and looked at their work. 2 names, equal height, equal prominence, declaring partnership to anyone who came through that gate. "There," Caleb said with satisfaction. "Now it's official. This is Brooks and North Ranch, home to 2 people who chose each other on purpose." Elena felt tears threatening again and didn't try to stop them this time. "Thank you," she said, "for all of it, for giving me a choice when I had none, for being patient while I figured out who I could be, for believing I was worth more than corn." "You were always worth more than corn," Caleb said quietly. "Worth more than any price. You just needed the freedom to realize it yourself." They stood together as the light faded, 2 people who'd found each other in darkness and built something strong enough to survive in daylight. Elena thought about the woman she'd been 4 months ago, silent in a saloon, traded like livestock, convinced she was worthless. That woman felt like someone she'd read about in a book, distant and unreal. She was Elena Brooks now, co-owner of a ranch, survivor of violence, woman who'd stood in front of a gun and declared her worth, woman who'd divorced a man who didn't deserve her and claimed a future she'd built with her own hands. "Come on," Caleb said finally. "Let's go inside. I'll make dinner while you rest. You've had a long day." But Elena shook her head. "Let's make dinner together. Partners, remember?" Caleb smiled, that slow, genuine smile that transformed his usually serious face. "Partners," he agreed. They walked toward the house together, passing under the gate with its new declaration carved in wood. Inside, they moved through the familiar rhythms of evening, building up the fire, preparing food, setting the table. But something had shifted, become settled. The uncertainty that had hung between them for months had crystallized into certainty. Over dinner, soup and fresh bread, simple and satisfying, Caleb asked the question Elena had been expecting. "What happens now? I mean, we've got your name on the gate and the legal situation sorted, but what do you want for the future, long term?" Elena took a sip of water, gathering her thoughts. "I want to build this place up, make it more sustainable, more diverse. I want to expand the garden, maybe add some fruit trees. I want to learn everything you know about ranching and then figure out what I can add to it. I want—" She paused, then continued more quietly. "I want to figure out who I am when I'm not defined by what I lack. When I'm not Marcus's barren wife or Caleb's charity case. Just Elena Brooks, rancher, partner, woman who gets to decide her own worth." "You're not a charity case," Caleb said firmly. "You never were. You're the best decision I've made since I bought this place." "And what do you want?" Elena asked. "For the future, I mean." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "I want what we're building right now. This partnership where we both contribute, both benefit, both choose to stay because we want to, not because we have to. I want—" He stopped, started again. "I want you to know that if you decide someday that you want more than partnership, I'm open to that conversation. But I'm not going to push, not going to make assumptions. What we have right now is enough. And if it stays this way forever, that's fine by me." Elena felt warmth spread through her chest. That's the first time a man has ever told me that what I am right now is enough. Not what I could be if I changed or what I should be according to some standard. Just enough as I am. You're more than enough, Caleb said. You're extraordinary, and I'll spend as long as it takes making sure you believe that. They cleaned up together after dinner, then sat on the porch in the gathering darkness, watching stars emerge one by one in the vast sky. A coyote called from somewhere in the distance. The horses moved quietly in their stable. The land breathed around them, alive and present. I'm happy, Elena said, surprised by the realization. Right now, in this moment, I'm actually happy. Good, Caleb said. You deserve to be. They sat in comfortable silence while the night deepened around them. And Elena thought about journeys and destinations, about how sometimes salvation came not in being rescued, but in being given the freedom to rescue yourself. About how the strongest foundations were built not on need, but on choice. 4 months ago, she'd been property. Tonight, she was a partner, sitting on the porch of a ranch that bore her name, planning a future she'd chosen for herself. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was better. It was real. Earned through courage and sustained by consistent daily choosing, and Elena wouldn't have traded it for anything. Summer arrived with the vengeance, turning the prairie gold and baking the earth until it cracked. Elena woke each morning before dawn to work in the garden before the heat became unbearable, her hands in the soil, coaxing life from dirt and water and stubbornness. The tomatoes she'd planted in May were heavy with fruit now, and she'd added squash, beans, potatoes, herbs that Mrs. Brennan swore by for cooking and medicine both. Caleb worked alongside her most mornings, the two of them moving in practiced synchronization, one weeding while the other watered, one harvesting while the other planned the next planting. They developed a language of glances and small gestures, communication that didn't require words. It was comfortable, this partnership they'd built, solid as the house they shared, reliable as the sunrise. But something was shifting beneath the comfort, like a current running under still water. Elena felt it in the way Caleb's hand would linger a moment too long when passing her tools. Felt it in the way his eyes followed her across the yard. Felt it in her own quickening pulse when he rolled up his sleeves and she caught sight of the corded muscles in his forearms, weathered and strong from years of hard labor. They were circling something, had been for weeks now. Ever since the divorce, ever since her name had been carved into that gate alongside his. A question neither was quite ready to ask, an answer neither knew how to give. 2 months had passed since Judge Morrison dissolved her marriage. 2 months of Elena learning what it meant to exist without fear, without expectation, without the crushing weight of being insufficient. She'd grown into herself in those months, found muscles she didn't know she had, discovered opinions she'd been suppressing, claimed space she'd been taught to apologize for taking. Ruth visited most Sundays now, bringing her 3 children who ran wild with Caleb's barn cats while the women worked in the garden or mended clothes on the porch. During one such visit in late July, Ruth watched Elena kneading bread dough with efficient motions and said casually, "You look different than when I first met you at the branding." Elena paused mid-knead. "Different how?" "Lighter," Ruth said thoughtfully. "Like someone lifted a weight you'd been carrying so long you forgot it was there. And the way you are with Caleb, it's nice to see. 2 people who actually like each other's company." "We're partners," Elena said, returning to her kneading. "Partners," Ruth repeated with a knowing smile. "That what you're calling it?" Elena felt heat rise to her face. "What else would we call it?" "I'm not saying there should be another name for it," Ruth said, holding up her hands in mock surrender. "But I've been married 7 years, Elena. I know what it looks like when 2 people are dancing around feelings they're not quite ready to name. And you and Caleb? You're dancing." After Ruth left, Elena stood on the porch, watching the sun set in brilliant oranges and reds, thinking about dancing and naming and the gap between wanting something and being brave enough to reach for it. She'd claimed so much already, her freedom, her name on a gate, her place in this world. But claiming another person's heart, offering her own in return, that felt like a different kind of courage. The next morning, Sheriff Garrett appeared at the ranch with news. Elena was collecting eggs when she saw him riding up, and her stomach clenched with old instinct. Authority meant trouble, meant consequences, meant nothing good. But Caleb was already walking out to meet him, and the sheriff was smiling, so perhaps not all trouble after all. "Mrs. Brooks, Mr. North," Sheriff Garrett called out, dismounting. "Got some news from Judge Morrison you'll want to hear." Elena set down her egg basket and joined them. "What kind of news?" "Marcus Hale's sentencing came through yesterday," the sheriff said. "Judge gave him 5 years for assault with a deadly weapon to be served at the Territorial Prison in Canyon City. No chance of early release given the nature of the crime. He's being transported there tomorrow morning." Elena felt something release in her chest that she hadn't realized she'd been holding. 5 years, she repeated. "Could have been worse," Sheriff Garrett said. Judge was inclined toward 10, but Marcus's lawyer argued that his intoxication and emotional state should be considered mitigating factors. Judge compromised at 5, said it was enough time for a man to either find redemption or confirm his own damnation. "Thank you for letting us know," Caleb said. "There's one more thing," the sheriff said, pulling an envelope from his coat. "Marcus wanted me to give you this, Mrs. Brooks. I read it first. It's my job to review prisoner correspondence, and I can tell you it's not threatening, but you don't have to take it if you don't want to." Elena stared at the envelope like it might bite her. Part of her wanted to refuse it, burn it unseen, deny Marcus even this small connection. But another part, the part that had spent 2 months learning to face difficult things head-on instead of hiding from them, needed to know what he had to say. "I'll take it," she said, accepting the envelope. After the sheriff left, Elena walked out to the far pasture where she could be alone. She sat under a cottonwood tree, the envelope heavy in her hands, and almost convinced herself not to open it. But finally, curiosity and perhaps some lingering sense of closure won out. She broke the seal and unfolded the single page inside. Marcus's handwriting was shakier than she remembered, probably from withdrawal or stress or both. The letter was brief. "Elena, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it, but sitting in this cell for 2 months has given me time to think, without the fog of whiskey dulling my brain, and I need to say some things even if you never respond. You were never the failure. I was. I took a good woman and tried to break her down into something I could control because I was terrified of my own inadequacy. I blamed you for not giving me children when the truth is I would have been a terrible father. I can see that now. Everything you said that day was true. I threw away something valuable because I couldn't see its worth. And when you found someone who could see it, I tried to destroy it because I couldn't stand watching you be happy with another man when I'd made you so miserable. I'm not asking for forgiveness or reconciliation. I'm just saying I'm sorry. Sorry for wasting 5 years of your life. Sorry for making you believe you were broken when you were whole all along. Sorry for trying to kill you when you finally found the courage to choose yourself. I hope you build a good life with Caleb North. He's a better man than I'll ever be, and you deserve someone who sees you clearly, who knows what he has." Marcus Elena read it twice, waiting for tears or anger or some strong emotion, but all she felt was a distant sadness for the waste of it all. 2 people trapped in a marriage that served neither of them, both damaged in different ways by expectations neither could meet. She folded the letter and tucked it into her pocket. She wouldn't keep it, would probably burn it eventually. But for now it served as a reminder of where she'd been and how far she'd traveled. A bookmark in a chapter that was finally, fully closed. When she returned to the house, Caleb was working on repairing a section of fence near the barn. He looked up when he heard her approach, his eyes searching her face. "You all right?" "I'm all right," Elena said, and meant it. Marcus wrote to apologize, said some things that probably needed saying, even if they don't change anything. "Do you want to talk about it?" Elena considered, then shook her head. "No, I think I'm done talking about Marcus Hale. He's part of my past, and I'd rather focus on my future." Something flickered across Caleb's face. Relief, hope, something tender. "Your future," he repeated. "What does that look like to you? Now that all the legal matters are settled and Marcus is locked away and you're truly free to decide." Elena moved closer to where he was working, leaning against the fence he was mending. The question hung between them, heavy with implications. "I think you know what I want," she said quietly. "We've been dancing around it for weeks. Maybe months." Caleb set down his hammer, giving her his full attention. "I want to hear you say it. No assumptions, no guessing. Just you telling me what you want." Elena took a breath, gathering courage. I want to stop dancing around it. Stop pretending that what we have is just partnership, just friendship, just convenience. It's more than that. It's been more than that for a while now, and I think you feel it too. I do, Caleb said, his voice rough. Have for months. But I didn't want to push, didn't want you to feel pressured or obligated. I don't feel pressured, Elena interrupted. I feel ready. For the first time in my life, I feel ready to choose someone, not because I have to or because I'm supposed to, but because I genuinely want to. Because being around you makes me better, makes me braver, makes me believe I'm worth more than I was taught to accept. Caleb stepped closer, closing the distance between them, but still not touching, still giving her space to change her mind. What exactly are you saying, Elena? I'm saying I want more than partnership, Elena said, her heart hammering but her voice steady. I want what comes after dancing around something. I want to know what it's like to be chosen by someone who sees all of me, the broken parts and the healing parts and the strong parts, and chooses me anyway. She stopped, suddenly breathless with the enormity of what she was offering. Caleb's eyes held hers, patient and steady, waiting for her to find the words. I want you to kiss me, Elena said finally, simply. If you want to. I want to know what it feels like to be kissed by someone who respects me, who waits for permission, who sees me as more than a vessel for children or a servant for household tasks. I want to start building something new, with you, on purpose. Caleb's hand came up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face with a gentleness that made her throat tight. His thumb traced her cheekbone, his touch reverent. I've wanted to kiss you for months, he said quietly. Wanted to show you what it could be like when someone touches you with care instead of cruelty. But I need you to be absolutely sure, because once we start down this path, I'm not going to want to go back. You'll be choosing me, and I'll be choosing you, and that's a beginning of something that could change everything. I'm sure, Elena said. I've never been more sure of anything. Caleb leaned in slowly, still giving her time to change her mind, to pull away, to say no. But Elena stayed exactly where she was, her eyes on his, her breath quickening with anticipation and something deeper. Hope, maybe. Trust. The belief that this moment wouldn't disappoint her. When his lips touched hers, it was nothing like the kisses she'd endured with Marcus. Those had been demanding, possessive, focused on taking rather than giving. This was different. This was gentle and questioning, a conversation without words. Caleb kissed her like she was precious, like she mattered, like her pleasure was as important as his own. Elena's hands came up to rest on his chest, feeling his heart beating steady and strong beneath her palms. The kiss deepened gradually, naturally, both of them learning the shape and taste of the other. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing harder, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. That was, he started. Worth waiting for, Elena finished, and she was smiling, actually smiling, joy bubbling up from somewhere deep inside. Definitely worth waiting for. They stood like that for a long moment, foreheads touching, breathing each other's air. Then Caleb pulled back enough to look at her properly. So what happens now? Now we build, Elena said. Together, slowly. We figure out what this looks like when two people choose each other without desperation or pressure or someone else's expectations. We learn each other. We make mistakes and fix them. She paused, then continued more quietly. We create something neither of us has had before. Something good. I like the sound of that, Caleb said. He kissed her forehead gently, then her cheek, then stepped back. But we should probably do it properly. No more sneaking around the edges of what we want. I want to court you, Elena Brooks. Want to take you to town on Sundays and let everyone see that we're together by choice. Want to bring you flowers from the meadow and make you laugh and show you every day that you made the right decision when you chose this life. You already do show me that, Elena said. Every day, in 100 small ways. Then I'll find 100 more, Caleb promised. Over the following weeks, true to his word, Caleb courted Elena with the same quiet consistency he brought to everything else. He brought her wildflowers and left them on the kitchen table where she'd find them in the morning. He taught her to ride better, taking her on long trips across the ranch to show her places he loved. A hidden spring where deer came to drink, a ridge where you could see for miles, a stand of aspens that turned gold in autumn. He asked her opinion on ranch decisions, listened carefully to her ideas, implemented the ones that made sense. And Elena courted him back in her own way. She learned what foods he liked best and made them without being asked. She mended his favorite shirt when it tore, fixing it so carefully the repair was nearly invisible. She sat with him in the evenings and told him stories about her childhood, the good memories she'd buried under years of bad ones, teaching him who she'd been before Marcus, who she was becoming now. They kissed often, learning each other through touch. But Caleb never pushed for more, never assumed that one kind of intimacy entitled him to another. He let Elena set the pace, following her lead, showing her through patience that her comfort mattered more than his desire. In September, Mrs. Brennan visited with news that the territorial legislature was debating a bill that would give married women the right to own property in their own names. Probably won't pass this session, she said pragmatically, but the fact they're debating it at all means things are changing, slowly, too slowly for those of us who'll be dead before we see real equality, but changing nonetheless. How long do you think, Elena asked, before women have the same rights as men? Mrs. Brennan laughed, but it was tired. Longer than I'll live to see, but maybe not longer than you will. Your generation, the ones coming after, you'll push further than we could. You'll make changes we could only dream about. After Mrs. Brennan left, Elena and Caleb sat on the porch watching the sunset. Elena was quiet, thinking about rights and changes and futures that might not include the people who fought hardest for them. What are you thinking about? Caleb asked. About how much had to be wrong before I could find my way to something right, Elena said slowly. About how I had to be sold like property before I could understand I was never property at all. About how Marcus's cruelty led me here, to you, to this life. And I don't know if I should be grateful for the journey or angry about the necessity of it. You can be both, Caleb said. Things can be terrible and transformative at the same time. What matters is what you do with it, what you build from the wreckage. And what are we building? Elena asked. Caleb was quiet for a moment. A partnership that looks like marriage but isn't constrained by what marriage usually means. Two people choosing each other every day, sharing a life, sharing work, sharing themselves. Building something that matters to both of us, not because the law requires it or society expects it, but because we want it. That sounds nice, Elena said, but also fragile. What happens when the wanting changes, when one of us wakes up and decides this isn't enough anymore? Then we talk about it, Caleb said simply. Make new agreements. Adjust the terms. Or part ways if that's what's needed, though I hope it won't be. The difference between this and what you had with Marcus is that this is built on choice, on consent that can be given or withdrawn, on the understanding that neither of us owns the other. Elena reached over and took his hand, lacing their fingers together. I don't want to part ways. I want to keep building this. Want to see what it becomes when we give it time and care and honest effort. Me too, Caleb said, squeezing her hand gently. October brought the first frost, and with it a decision that had been growing in Elena's mind for weeks. One morning over breakfast, she said carefully, I've been thinking about the house, about our sleeping arrangements. Caleb looked up from his coffee, alert. All right. We each have our own room, Elena continued, which was necessary at first, essential even. I needed that space, that door I could lock, that guarantee of privacy, but I don't need it anymore. Or rather, she corrected herself. I don't want it anymore. I want to share a room with you, share a bed, share that kind of intimacy. Caleb set down his cup carefully. You're sure? There's no rush, Elena. We can keep things as they are for as long as you need. I'm sure, Elena said firmly. I've had 6 months to figure out who I am without a man controlling my body and my space. And what I've figured out is that I'm someone who wants to share herself with you. Not because I have to, not because it's expected, but because I choose to, because I trust you. Because I want to know what it's like to be intimate with someone who sees me as an equal partner. Caleb's hand found hers across the table. Then we'll take it slow. Learn each other. You tell me what you want, what you don't want. You stop me if anything doesn't feel right. This is about both of us, but your comfort comes first, always. That night, Elena moved her few possessions into Caleb's room, the larger of the two bedrooms, with windows that faced east to catch the morning sun. They talked through the afternoon about expectations and boundaries, about Elena's fears and Caleb's promises. And when they finally came together in the big bed with its warm quilts and soft pillows, it was nothing like what Elena had known before. Caleb touched her like she was valuable, asked permission before removing each piece of clothing, stopped when she tensed and waited for her to relax before continuing, showed her that intimacy could be about giving pleasure as much as receiving it, that her satisfaction mattered, that her body was her own, even when she chose to share it. Afterward, lying in Caleb's arms while he traced idle patterns on her shoulder, Elena felt something she'd never experienced after intimacy with Marcus. Contentment. Peace. The sense that she'd shared something rather than had something taken. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For being patient. For treating me like I matter. For showing me that this could be good." Caleb pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "It's good for me too. Better than I knew it could be when two people are actually choosing each other." They fell asleep tangled together, and Elena woke in the middle of the night to find herself still held safely in Caleb's arms. No part of her wanted to pull away, to put distance between them, to protect herself from vulnerability. She felt safe here, chosen, valued. She felt loved, though neither of them had said the word yet. Winter came early that year, a hard frost in November that killed the last of the garden. Elena and Caleb worked together to harvest what could be saved, to prepare the ranch for the cold months ahead. They'd laid in supplies, repaired buildings, made sure the cattle had access to shelter. And then one morning, Elena woke to find the world transformed by snow, everything white and clean and new. They spent the short, cold days working together and the long nights talking by the fire. Caleb taught Elena to play chess, and she proved to have a strategic mind that regularly beat him. Elena taught Caleb songs her mother had sung, her voice finding confidence in the safety of their home. They read together from Caleb's small collection of books, taking turns with the passages, sharing thoughts about what they meant. On Christmas Eve, Caleb gave Elena a box wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a leather journal, hand-bound, with blank pages waiting to be filled. "For your thoughts," Caleb said. "Your stories. Your plans for the ranch or recipes you want to remember, or just whatever you want to put down in writing." So there's a record of Elena Brooks, not as someone's wife or someone's property, but as herself. Elena ran her fingers over the smooth leather, throat tight with emotion. "I don't know what to write." "Start with today," Caleb suggested. "Write about this moment, about what you're feeling, and then tomorrow write something else. Build a record of your life one day at a time." That night, Elena made her first entry in careful handwriting. December 24th, 1874. "I am Elena Brooks, co-owner of Brooks and North Ranch. Today, I received a gift from Caleb North, my partner in this life I'm building. I am no longer defined by what I cannot do, but by what I choose to create. I am learning what it means to be valued. I am learning what it means to value myself. This is not the life I imagined when I was young. It's better. It's real. It's mine." Spring came again, as it always did, melting the snow and turning the prairie green. Elena planted her garden again, but this time with Caleb's help from the start, the two of them planning together what they wanted to grow. Mrs. Brennan visited in April with news that Marcus had been released early for good behavior after serving 3 years of his sentence, but had immediately left the territory, heading east toward St. Louis. Elena felt nothing at the news beyond relief that he was gone for good. On a warm evening in May, nearly a year after Elena had stood in front of a gun and declared her choice, she and Caleb sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. Elena had her journal in her lap, having just finished an entry about the day's work and tomorrow's plans. "Can I ask you something?" Caleb said. "Always." "Do you ever regret it, choosing this life over, I don't know, going somewhere else, starting completely fresh where no one knew your story?" Elena thought about it carefully, giving the question the weight it deserved. "No," she said finally. Because this isn't about geography or running away from the past. It's about learning who I am when I'm not being crushed under someone else's expectations. And I couldn't have done that alone. I needed... She paused, finding the words. I needed someone to show me that men could be different, that relationships could be different. You showed me that, Caleb. You gave me space to heal and then space to grow, and I don't think I would have found that anywhere else. I'm glad, Caleb said quietly. Glad you stayed. Glad you chose me. I'll keep choosing you, Elena said, every day, for as long as you'll have me. Caleb turned to look at her, his expression serious in the fading light. Elena Brooks, I love you. I should have said it months ago, but I wanted to wait until I was sure you'd believe me, until you understood that I'm not saying it to obligate you or trap you or get something from you. I'm saying it because it's true, because you're the strongest, bravest, most remarkable woman I've ever known, because you took a terrible situation and transformed it into something good, because when I think about my future, you're in every part of it. I love you. Elena felt tears spilling down her cheeks, but they were good tears this time. Happy tears. I love you too, she said. I've loved you for months, but I was scared to say it. Scared it would change things or create expectations or... She laughed at herself. I'm still learning to trust good things, but I do love you, Caleb North. You saved my life in that saloon, but more importantly, you gave me the space and safety to save myself. And I'm grateful for that every single day. Caleb pulled her close, and they sat together under the emerging stars, two people who'd found each other in darkness and built something that could withstand the light. They didn't talk about marriage, the legal kind that would change Elena's status from independent woman to someone's wife again. That conversation could come later, if it came at all. What they had was already more real, more binding than any legal document could make it. They had choice. They had partnership. They had love that was given freely rather than extracted through obligation. And they had time, all the time in the world, to keep building, keep choosing, keep creating the life they wanted rather than accepting the one they'd been told to want. Years later, Elena would make an entry in her journal about the woman she'd been that night in the saloon, silent, traded for corn, convinced of her own worthlessness. She would write about transformation and courage, about how sometimes salvation comes not from being rescued, but from being given the freedom to rescue yourself. She would write about a quiet rancher who understood that the rarest gift you could give another person was not protection or provision, but choice. But that was years later. On this night in May, 1 year after everything changed, Elena Brooks simply sat on a porch with the man she loved, under stars that had witnessed her journey from property to person, and knew that she was exactly where she belonged, not because someone had put her there, but because she had chosen it. And in a harsh land that took without asking, that was the most revolutionary act of all, a woman claiming her own life, her own body, her own future, not through force or anger or violence, but through the quiet daily practice of choosing herself, of knowing her worth, of building something real and lasting from the ruins of what had tried to break her. The woman sold for a sack of corn had become the woman who carved her own name on a gate, and that made all the difference.